Yeah, Mike, at a ACI North America board meeting or conference, the same thing happens. We talk about next gen, eyes glaze over. And a couple of years ago, we were putting together our annual meeting program, and I told our staff to take the next gen session out because, we have one every year, and it's the same thing. And that commission that Bill talked about, we proposed going to satellite-based navigation by 1996. That was our goal. Al Gore waved around the vacuum tube. Remember that? We got the vacuum tubes out. We've made some incremental progress.
Was that before or after the internet? I'm sorry.
It was just right after the internet.
Okay.
After he invented that. And no, you're right. There's a credibility problem. Part of it, there is progress being made. It's better than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and maybe Next Gen needs a better PR firm to sort of talk about the progress that has been made. But I think, Mike, you're right. If we're trying to build these two different systems, and people who buy and sell airplanes, that airplane's got to work for 30 or 40 years. Your carrier's going to buy an airplane in 10 years from now, it's going to be obsolete. I don't think so. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Roger, do we have a little more time, or are we about done? Okay. I'm gonna propose a question that I think all three of the panelists are gonna have a view on, and Bruce, I'll go to you first. Alliances are sold on the number of dots on a map, right? It seems to be at least some alliances like to market themselves that way. The economics of the U.S. industry, and I would arguably say probably some of the European sector, are not necessarily the regional sector's friend right now, whether it be in terms of compensation, regulatory imposition of cost, fuel cost, and now we're having to maintain airframes that we're learning are quite expensive. How might this affect, the thinking of the alliances, the regional sector in Europe, and certainly the airports that dot on the map is vitally important?
Yeah, great question. Of course, for an alliance, there's a benefit to having a big scale of operation. We'll take you everywhere in the world. Now, I think we would argue that, and most alliances would probably agree that, some places are more important than others and larger and so on. So the focus naturally for our alliance, and I would guess the others, is sort of premium business travelers. They tend to go to big cities, the Londons of the world and Tokyos and so on. But nevertheless, they come from everywhere. They come from all the smaller airports. And there are tremendous pressures on air service. You brought up some of them. Some of them we heard earlier. There are distortions happening in the system. If the European Union raises huge fees to passengers to pay for its investments, and the Arab Middle East carriers don't have to pay those fees, their tickets are cheaper, and people will just fly around Europe, to get away. And this, of course, affects all sorts of things: how much capacity you invest in, what airports get served, what you can afford to do. The world is chaotic with respect to both its legislation and its fees right now. And I think there's a risk here that things will go against us for a while. The costs of fixing things are rising, and they're not shared equally, or in some cases you might even argue rationally, depending on your point of view. For the people who use them may not be paying for them. Some competitors who benefit from things you do don't have to pay for them, others pay twice. It's crazy, and it will result in, I think, shutdowns of small airports that otherwise wouldn't have shut down, in the rising and falling fortune of carriers. It will make Bill Swelbar's blogs ring with interesting tidbits for years.
Wonderful.
It's an endless field of complex and rich problems. And we heard some of them today already. I think if you talk to the people around the room, you'll hear more. It truly is a global aviation environment. There are alternatives to go everywhere.
Yeah.
Every different way you can get there, and yet in our haste to sort of fix one problem, we often create another one.
Right.
And we've seen it over and over in my whole career. So anyway, in a short answer, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on out
Sure.
there. And I think a lot of challenges for all of us to keep an eye on, and not just in our little piece of the world, but all over the world. Everything is affecting us, everything. What happens in the Middle East affects you here. What happens in Japan affects you here. It's not just them anymore.
It is so true. How it is that, I mean, just taking a look at the price of oil today and the difference between West Texas Intermediate and Brent, and how it is that Brent is being affected by events in Europe, and how that is ultimately impacting the price of a gallon of Jet A. I mean, it's fascinating. But Mike, you know, to pick up on where Bruce started.
Well, I'd like to add from a different perspective. Bruce was talking earlier about alliances and regional carriers and agreements and contracts. I think one of the things that we need to ensure for the future is that there is sufficient scope in any agreement that it does not destroy the energy and creativity in the regional. At the moment, we have a great deal of determination in Europe as to you will fly those routes on this schedule to suit our long-haul operation. Now that's pretty demoralizing for the CEO downwards, because you're left as to what can you actually do? And if you see a new route, you have to go cap in hand and say, do you mind if I fly this route? Because there's a possibility that 3 passengers a year that currently go through your hub here might be going through somebody else's hub. I'm exaggerating, but that's the general principle. Mm-hmm. These are problems that exist today. If we look tomorrow at how this is going to work in Europe, we are running out of the fundamental capacity, not in the air, on the ground. We are running out of hub airport capacity. Majors are going to want to continue to grow, but with due respect to your members, they can't continue to grow the major hubs in Europe at the rate at which the market wants to grow, because getting a new runway is an incredibly difficult problem. So the only guaranteed source of our fundamental requirement, which is runway capacity, are secondary airports. And I'm sure in the next decade, we will see new opportunities, even for not just the independent regionals, but for the partners of majors, to look more and more at secondary airports. They'll be used as development tools for secondary airports. And then you'll see the majors come in there and build up from what the regionals have created. We have so many slot-constrained major hub airports. So, sorry, I don't know whether that's...
No. It's a terrific perspective, and Greg, you get the last word.
Well, a couple of numbers on the dots on the map, and then a sort of overall point. You know, in 2009, 157 of those dots lost all service as compared to 08. In 2010, 13 more lost all service as compared to 09. And through May of 2011, 25 more airports lost all service compared to the same period in 2010. Yeah. In 09, 414 airports had fewer flights than the previous year. In 2010, 315 airports had fewer flights, so on. So you're starting to see this. A broader point, Mike talked about the hubs. You know, when you look at things and you look at the services being pulled down, there's still those 20 or 30 big airports that are really busy and growing, and that's where a lot of the problem is. They're very constrained, and those dots depend on service into those big airports in order to connect their communities to the world. And if we don't solve next gen, if we don't do something about that, and if we keep on with this archaic, stupid way that we in the United States fund infrastructure on the ground that I would argue suits the so-called short-term needs of the legacy carriers that want to maintain control and keep competition out of those big airports, then those dots on the map are going to have tougher and tougher time. We need to look at the way. You know, I really appreciate you bringing up the ground infrastructure. The way we finance ground infrastructure in this country is completely outdated. It's a pre-deregulation relic. It needs to be changed. So we don't fix air traffic control, and we don't do that. Just look at the 20 or 30 busiest airports. Take the airlines' arguments against Paducah or somebody raising the PFC. Just look at those and what you would like to do at those airports. And The airlines tell the directors of those airports all the time, oh yeah, we want to do X, Y, and Z, put it in the PFC. Say, well, my PFC is pledged out to 2030. I can't do that. So even stuff that those airlines want to do, they can't do. They certainly don't want it in their rate base. And I would argue that they like the system the way it is because it keeps control of those airports and keeps competition down. And I would also argue that that's not to the advantage of the regional industry either, because we want to keep those dots, as many as possible, connected to the global air transportation system.
Thanks. As you're going to hear tonight at the Wild Horse Saloon, give it up for a great panel right here.
Thank you.
Bill, Mike, Greg, thank you very, very much for joining us. They'll probably be milling around here, available to take any questions. Again, great panel, a great way to kick off today. And everybody welcome and see you through the hall through the rest of the day.
Thanks, Roger.